Shabbat Shalom. Often when I go to Jerusalem, I get my haircut from a New Zealand-born Ole, a Jew who made Aliyah, Sam, who's been cutting my family's hair for 2 to 3 decades at least. So what it takes 25 minutes to do over here, it takes him about an hour because he likes to talk. He's always opening the door to the lady who comes after me and says, Savlanut, Savlanut, patience, patience. But he was raised in an Orthodox, traditional background in New Zealand, now very secular, hasn't been in a synagogue in decades probably, but he loves talking about religion. And I remember once he started talking to me about Jerusalem and comparing Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and he says, Tel Aviv is all very well and nice and interesting, but everything is out in the open. You see everything. He says Jerusalem is mysterious. Jerusalem is hidden behind its courtyards. You don't know what you're going to get. And he says, yes, it's hard to live in Jerusalem with all the tensions between the religious and the non-religious, the political situation. But he said that he felt that he had to, because of those who came before him, his ancestors who would have done anything to have that privilege to be able to live in Jerusalem and to rebuild Israel. And he had that privilege. And somehow that was a thought that moved him very much. And I always felt made him feel like he was something larger in life. And I remember hearing him speak and think, well, he may not be religious or go to synagogue all that often, but he is completely alive, religiously and spiritually, with this part of our faith, love of Zion. And religion, or religious or not religious, is so complicated in any case. And this has always been one of the strange parts of our return to the land of Israel. Right? This week, on August 29th to August 31st, we celebrated 125 years since the first World Zionist Congress in Switzerland, in Basel. And so we're going to have these festive, they're going to have festive meals and get-togethers this coming week, beginning tomorrow. And the president of Israel, Isaac Herzog, was there, and he tried to recreate that picture of Herzl on the balcony overlooking the river on the balcony of the hotel where he's staying, just as Herzl did. So on one hand, Zionism was a political nationalist movement that arose out of all the nationalist movements that were present in the 1800s in Europe, and just a way for Jews to have a home, a place of safety, and to normalize the Jews' condition after the failure of emancipation. And the Jews like Herzl, living in Western Central Europe, just hoping for the Jews to feel included, to feel equal, and we're losing hope in that process. But it was always also something more than that, part of a much greater and more ancient and more powerful story. And it goes all the way back to Abraham in the book of Genesis, who's told by God to leave everything he knows, lech lecha, and to go to the land that I will show you, to go to the land of Israel. And half of our parsha this morning are all laws. When you arrive in the land, well, God will show you where he wants you to establish his name, and there you shall have a house of worship. There my name will dwell. And if there's a war, once you're there, then the soldiers who are just married, well, they can stay back. And those who just planted a vineyard in the Holy Land, well, they can stay back too. And make sure that there is justice in all of your gates. And all that love and yearning for Zion, from the rivers of Babylon to next year in Jerusalem, to the first exilees in Babylon, to the early medieval poets, to the Hasidim who left in the 1800s to establish communities in Israel. And so Herzl and the leaders of the early Zionist movement, they were aware that they had a place in that great big story. So it's interesting, on one hand, if you look at the program from that first Congress, on one hand, it's all written in this beautiful German calligraphy, doesn't seem to have much to do with our Jewish story. And the conference itself might not have looked that different than all of the other intellectual conferences going on at that time. And it writes that the attendees were encouraged by Herzl to wear their finest clothes and white ties. And Herzl, he wanted that touch because that's where he came from. He was as close to German or Austrian nobility as a Jewish family probably could get. And that first Congress was a way of coalescing all of the movements that Herzl himself had done, going from leader to leader, even meeting with the Kaiser to try and discuss Zionism. He'd become a household name. But Herzl himself was completely secular. He had once suggested that all the Jews should convert to Christianity if it would keep them safe. But yet it's also incredible. He wrote the official invitation for the first conference was entirely in Hebrew, rabbinic Hebrew and biblical Hebrew. And it's amazing to think, well, how many of the people he sent it to could have read and understood all of the invitation? And although Herzl himself was not religious, he made sure there was a kosher restaurant in Basel. And he made sure to eat all of his meals there, even though he wrote he found the meals completely unappetizing and he himself did not keep kosher. But he made a point. And he also went to synagogue the week before the conference, and he was called up to the Bima for an aliyah. And this is what he wrote in his diary. When I went up to the podium, I was more moved than on any day of the Congress. An emotion choked a few Hebrew words of blessing in my throat, far more than during the opening speech, the closing words, or any of the discussions. Because he knew the power of the moment. And perhaps he felt and he knew he was being swept up in something so much more than himself. And then there was a famous journalist and author from Odessa at the time, Mordechai Ben Ami, who wrote, walking to the casino, I was so excited that I thought my legs would give way. The delegates greet one another warmly, speaking in low tones. Herzl walks over to the podium. This was not the Herzl I knew, as I had seen him just the night before. Before us rose a noble, almost angelic figure whose deep and piercing stare mixed quiet majesty with unutterable sorrow. This was once again not the elegant Dr. Herzl of Vienna, but a royal sign of the house of David, risen suddenly from the grave in all his legendary glory. And Herzl, for all of his secularism, was personifying the dream of Jewish history, the sorrow over the loss of Jerusalem, the 2,000 years of exile, the millennia of Jewish suffering, and also that love of Zion that's at the heart of our Jewish soul. And it's been there since the beginning of our mission. And decades later, Rav Kook, the first chief rabbi pre-state Israel, he would speak of Herzl as Mashiach ben Yosef, as the Messiah, son of Joseph, the precursor to the true Messiah, the Messiah, son of David. And so he saw Herzl as a physical Messiah coming to lay the groundwork before the spiritual Messiah. And so he thought the Herzl may not have known his divine message or what he was doing fully, but Rav Kook thought that he was being moved to make an impression on history just the way that God had done with the redemption from Egypt or saving the Jews from Haman. And so Herzl wrote in his diary, at Basel I founded the Jewish state. If I said this out loud today, I will be greeted by universal laughter. In 5 years, perhaps, and certainly in 50 years, everyone will perceive it. And now we look back and we see the truth of that. And that first Congress did enable the foundation of the process, decades in the making, that would lead to the first Jewish sovereign state in 2,000 years on the land of the Torah, and with all of its blessings and issues on its road and today. So all of this reminds us, on one hand, of the power of dreams and of the realization, but also that we should not put limits on what it means to be religious or not religious, or how the divine works in this world and through whom the divine works, how those ancient dreams are expressed and new visions open up. Now all of us are called to live by the power of our tradition in the very small way that we each do, however we do in our own little lives, in our families, in our communities, that small piece that we each live is somehow related to a much greater story of our people, of our culture. And we never know when that little piece, however it looks, part of a process or movement, will become something we cannot even imagine. So on this morning where we're celebrating anniversaries of the first Jewish Congress, of Berlin's, the Cantor, let us remember the power of dreams. And let us remember our place in the Jewish story and celebrate that there is a Jewish state and that we are part of it. We've seen it's come to be in our days. And to remember and to be grateful for all the wonderful miracles in our own lives that we all witness. Shabbat Shalom.